I'm Anne-Marie. I'm a Customer Success Manager here at Dovetail.
And I'm Sarah Caldwell. I look after customer success and support here at Dovetail.
What we're going to run through today is really more of the playback side of the product. So following along from where we left the session earlier on in the week, that focus was really around crafting insights, going from raw data to those insights and crafting insights of a high quality. What we're going to go through today is moving into Playback, which is more of our repository solution. We're going to talk through what the final output can actually look like in Playback. I'll give you an idea of the types of stories that many of our customers create and then share out to their internal audiences, so that you can sort of get a flavor for how you can then implement those yourselves. So here we should be seeing the front page of Playback. So as I said, this is really your repository style solution, where you can bring in multiple different types of media, whether it's presentation decks that you've created, whether it's files, PDFs, readouts, they can all live in this. So what I'm going to start with is the home page. Now, this is really the landing page for anyone at your organization to come in and get a sense of what research is happening across the organization. Oftentimes, best practice is to let people know what they're actually viewing, and saying that this is a place that X team maintains, that it's a place for you to self-serve things for your team to make decisions, and also kind of help them along around what are the best things for them to search. We'll go into search and discoverability shortly, but helping your stakeholders to get a better sense of how they can navigate the repository tool. On the homepage, it's also really can be quite impactful to serve up to anyone who's consuming what are the most recent insights related to the entire, perhaps what you're creating in markup. Now you can simply create those by using what's called a search block, and you can create almost like a saved search on your homepage that shows anything from insights that were published in like the last month, or perhaps insights related to a top tag from across the space, insights related to a product area, or insights even related to someone who might be contributing. Now, I'm talking about insights as that final output, just as an example for this, but you can really use any of the artifacts that are within the entire product to surface them then on your Playback homepage. So stories, files, the projects themselves, notes, tags, highlights, and then into insights. Now, something that I want to call out that's quite important when we talk about Playback, particularly if you're newer to this product, is that there are a couple of concepts that are air-gapped to the different products. So within Playback, your main concepts to understand are stories, which is your final research output, files, which are things like decks, PDFs, white papers. And then when you move into the markup side of the product, which we've been through, that's really where you've got your projects, your notes, your tags, your highlights, and insights. So super important to understand where those two come from for how you can start to display them. So have a think about what might be best useful for your audiences.
Two quick questions, Am. The first is from Monica. Can we set the homepage as the default landing page for viewers?
Yes, you can. Yeah. So when you invite viewers into the workspace, it's going to ask you like which products you want them to be able to view. Now, in order for Playback to be the default for them, you just need to make sure that they have view access to Playback and markup if you want them to see raw research as well. But what's most common is to give viewers access to Playback, because that's kind of where you want them to be consuming output. One of the reasons that we switched into this three products instead of the one is to segment out the final research output away from the raw research so that it makes that experience for a stakeholder a little bit more focused. So the recommendation would be to invite a user and invite them as a viewer to Playback, and that would be their default screen.
Awesome. We had a question from Anne about how to access that menu. I just asked her to clarify which menu, but I think it might be, yeah, you're at it, the contextual menu.
For sure. So you've got these two options here. So I've actually added what's called a search block. So when I'm editing the homepage here, I can just select from this editor. I'm going to add a drag to embed a saved search. And then just with the little cog here, I can configure what I want, what I want it to display. So again, totally up to you what you want to serve up. But yeah, everything lives within this editor. And you've also got a couple of recommended templates. So things like recent highlights that were created, or recently, or projects that you as a contributor might be working on.
Great. I've just dropped a link to a help menu about customizing your workspace home. Anne says that's locked down for me. Would that be a user type?
And yes. So to be able to edit this homepage, you need to be a manager of Playback. Now, that could be like a research ops person. It could just be someone who's more of an admin for the space. But because everyone will see this homepage, that's typically why we've sort of added that permission. So I would just request that from your like workspace owner to say you want to add some great content for everyone to see.
Awesome. Sandrine, the question of the day: if a user doesn't have viewer access to markup, can they see insights on the Playback page?
Hello, Sandrine, a returning guest. Yes. So this is something that's come up quite a bit, and something that we're currently rectifying. Previously, and still today actually, if there's some content from markup, so your insights on your front page, you wouldn't be able to see that if you were a viewer and you didn't have access to the markup product. However, in early August, we realized that that's quite a bit of an obstacle. So in early August, a viewer in Playback will be able to see that rich and influential media that's coming through from markup. So if it's your short videos or highlight reels, they will now be able to see them without needing to have access.
Yes, we are equally excited.
Yeah.
Our amazing product manager, Rusty, who's been working on a lot of the sort of consumer-facing aspects of Playback, has talked a lot about how we first designed Playback for the researchers. Let's make sure it feels really intuitive and easy for them to start publishing. And then we're layering on those people who are really consuming research. So we've been thinking about this in a stepwise way. Let's make this really beautiful. Thanks. We lost a charger. We've been thinking about this as, let's make this really feel good for researchers and have this be a meaningful experience for them. And then let's start prioritizing the consumption experience, which core to that is certainly being able to see the raw research itself. So super excited for that as well. That's awesome. Elizabeth Atkin guests these stories, which I think we're talking about viewers here.
Yes, yeah, definitely. So stories is one of those, and we'll go into them now. I'm just going to hit recent in the top left. And as I mentioned, those concepts that are within Playback, we've got stories and files of the first two here. So we'll go into stories. Now, what I want to call out is, is yes, the idea is that stories as a concept within Playback is accessible to viewers because it's kind of the output that we want them to hopefully be influencing their decision making. So within the stories themselves, these are kind of the themes that we see quite commonly across researchers creating. For example, quarterly research recaps, Boss Traveler. We're going to imagine that this workspace is in the travel industry, and Boss Traveler is one of their personas. We've also got questions that can often be asked of the workspace. So we know that researchers can be overwhelmed with requests for information. So a stories is a great way for you to take a question that is being asked from across the organization and piece insights and finished output together with secondary research and just research and answer that question. Another example is this top takeaways from video interviews. So really looking at like, is there a dominant research method that you use? I know for us, we talk to a lot of product managers and researchers and designers, and the main way that we do that is through interviews. So it's common for us to do kind of like a roundup of what's happening, or what are the takeaways from those specific interviews. So if yours are usability testing, maybe you want to create some familiarity with the audience by creating stories related to that topic. So let's jump into some of these just to give you a bit more of insight. I personally love the metadata that appears on it because it helps to solve the age-old question of, did this person actually read what I've shared with them? And also it's a great place to sort of have some dialogue. So in this instance, I can see that my Boss Traveler story has had 134 views. We've had 5 topics, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. And the title is Boss Traveler. As I scroll down, I can see my evidence related to who this Boss Traveler is. What are their pain points? What are their needs? And then some actual quotes that help to support this persona. Now, it's not uncommon for particularly a team that might be designing for the Boss Traveler that they would come in. What they might do is actually follow this story. And then the important thing to remember about a story is that they're dynamic. So just like we were looking at that story editor early on, I've got in here a search block, which actually shows me all of the notes that are containing these sort of quotes that are related to the Boss Traveler. So the point about following them is that as that persona is getting added, as it's like a living thing, as there's more content being added to it, if I'm following that, I, as a product manager or as a person interested in the Boss Traveler, I can come in here and be updated. Now, when I say updated, notifications, of course, can be distracting. So you can select how you'd like to receive those notifications, whether you would want to just see them in-app. So when you come into Dovetail, you can get an email, or you can enable the Slack integration for what you follow. So personas is always a big one. And I have said this, I think I said this in the other one, but I'm not a design person. So I'll typically use the story templates in the top. These are the ones that we see, I guess, as well, are quite common in terms of content, but it's a great place to kind of get started and just be using that sort of drop and drag motion. Now, I want to call out that this Boss Traveler, it's quite short. And I think that the content that we see when we look in more customers, when we see customer workspaces, is this could be very, very long. So I don't want you to be deterred by the I guess, briefness of these examples. We have teams that will translate like a 50-page deck into a story, and that looks quite different. But just something to be aware of, that it is flexible, and yeah.
Goncalo and Sarah are both asking if we can create our own story templates.
So this is something that's on the radar, and is a big request from teams. So particularly if you're like on the research ops side and you want to maintain a kind of a standard of how people create stories, we're going to give you that ability, just like you can create a project template. What you can do is actually duplicate a story. So let's say, we do the research recap in this instance, pretty much the same each time. You can always duplicate it and then scrub the information from your last one. But today there is that extra step. But yeah, we'll definitely let you know when that's a development. We can also drop the public roadmap in as well, so you can follow along on all the things that we've got coming up.
And if you have feedback about the types of stories that you would want to templatize, we'd love to hear that. You can drop that in the chat if you like, or our product managers are in our Slack instance. You can feel free to drop some feedback there. That's great. So James has a little bit longer of a question about discussions to explore additional formats for storytelling, more like slides. The article-like feedback feels like it's difficult as a tool in the context of presenting and storytelling.
Yeah, definitely hear you with that. We don't have too much of like a vision in mind at the moment to make it look a bit more like slides. I do understand where you're coming from. I think like with the actual like stakeholder that you might be talking to, that is part of the expectation, particularly if you're most used to using, say, decks. Where we're kind of at with it today is the introduction of being able to drag presentations and actually have them in the product. But at the moment in the Playback product, it's not this kind of clicking to the right to go to the next slide at the moment. So you can actually do something similar with the present function in markup. If you have a series of insights, you can present that insight, and then as you present it, you can click to the next one and it'll talk about the next insight in the project. So unfortunately not in Playback.
Great. Yep. And there's a link to summarizing and presenting insights in markup in the chat. Davina asked about possible to rearrange highlight reels. We haven't totally talked about highlights or highlight reels, but we actually did get this question in 101. Do you want to click through to a highlight reel here, AM, and maybe we can ground the question in what we're looking at?
Mm-hmm. Please hold.
So what we're doing here is clicking into we're now in our markup product, which can flow through into Playback. But we're looking here now at a series of highlights that created an insight that can be linked into a story.
Exactly. Yeah. So at the moment, what I would be doing is like playing each one of these individually.
I really like being able to match up people's interests.
Like so. And then for the actual highlight reel, I'd be downloading it towards the bottom of the screen, and that would actually send me a MP4 of each of those tags together. Now, video editing and being able to like reorder those highlights is something that we have on the radar, but we're going to send out a little hack that you can do to do a bit of a workaround that one of our product designers has kind of invented, but it's definitely something that is requested.
Yeah, I love all these questions about how to make sure that your research really pops for your stakeholders, and that might involve having the format look different or having the videos in a different order. Definitely something that we're thinking about. Elizabeth asked about anchor links to send people down the page if a story is really long. This reminds me of how Notion works. Is there that concept in a story?
Not at the moment, but that is actually something I haven't been asked about. So we'll definitely share that with the product managers. I think that, that is something that we should definitely look into. But to date, particularly if they're getting quite long, we don't have a way of jumping ahead.
Yeah, this is great feedback for us as we think about, again, moving from creating a product that's really great for individual researchers, organizing, and as James mentioned, maybe asynchronous communication, to more of a relationship with other folks in your organization. So thank you for all this feedback. This is awesome.
Great. So jumping into another of the sort of story examples with this quarterly research recap, what I wanted to call out here is just the different types of content that we can have in this recap. So, and we talked about, duplicating this. So if there are things that you're like continuing to do, which is always a great tool to help people understand, how the repository works and what the teams are actually working on, is creating a story about what you are working on and including different formats. So we've got latest files in the repository. So there's a couple of examples here, one a presentation, one a white paper, and I can see the same metadata there. The quarter's most significant insights, how has that changed from the last one? And, any meaningful progressions on other themes from across the org. So again, being able to follow this in the top, impactful for having an understanding of what's happened in research that quarter. You can share this out either publicly around the organization, or you can just share it out with a link. Now, towards the very top, you'll notice that we've got this topics section. Now, this is another concept that is air-gapped within Playback, and it's a way for you to categorize all of the types of content that you might have in your repository. So, for example, a topic might be voice of the customer, and this is a type of report that teams will do once a month or once a quarter or whatever, on whatever timeline. But as a stakeholder, something that I might want to look at is coming into the workspace and seeing, I want to see the voice of the customer projects or content from the last X amount of time. Now, as a manager of the Playback product, part of your responsibility, or something you can employ, is doing that categorization for them so that it's super easy for someone who's coming in to collect and use all of the information related to voice of the customer. So for example, if I use the search and discover in the top bar and I hit persona, I'm going to see anything that has the topic persona. So this might tell me that, of course, Boss Traveler we know is one of our personas, but then also that there is potentially some developments within our research reports, like each quarter, that there's been some changes or relations to personas in there. I've also want to call out that these will end up being suggested towards the top, suggested to the stakeholder. So the idea is that it's easy for them to kind of get an understanding of how to navigate it, essentially. If you're ever wondering what topics are, what concepts are within each product, Search and Discover is kind of the perfect place for you to have a look and understand. So when I hit the Search and Discover bar, it will automatically go to the product that I'm in and default to that, so Playback. And then it'll show me those two main concepts within the product. So we've got stories and files. And then if I go to markup, here we're going to see more of the raw research and the tools that we have for actually doing your synthesis. So tagging, highlights, insights, and notes. So something to be across. And finally, in the top right-hand corner, the filter. So the same conditions that we were talking about with some of those saved feeds and searches, being able to use the filters here can help you to narrow down on things like fields that you've set up related to demographics or business segments, who's contributed to something. So don't forget that the filters are there. They can really help you to really drill in. Soon to come as well, this quarter is going to be saved searches. So if there's a couple of searches that you are like consistently doing, and viewers will have access to this as well, they'll be able to save their own searches so that they can return to that content. So I'll pause for any questions.
We've actually got a question about the view metrics. I think we are going to talk about measuring the impact of your research as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, definitely. So this is a newbie, super exciting. We don't, it's tricky obviously to measure the value of research. Story metrics in this instance are going to help you understand, one, if it's been shared, how many people has it reached? If it hasn't been shared, where has it been discovered? Where are people kind of happening upon it? What are the type of audiences? So if you've encouraged your team to add their audience, which they should when they, not their audience, their role when they sign up, you'll be able to see which roles are engaging with which content the most. Things like most popular, what's trending. And again, this is quite new, so please let us know if there's something that's useful for you as well. You will be able to see like how long is spent on the page, kind of drop off it as well. I think that the idea is that it just gives you a little bit more confidence in what's viewed. And something to call out as well is because this is a bit of a demo workspace, it's a little bit light on the audience because it's mostly people in our small San Francisco office. But yeah, we want to be able to like help you prove what the value of research is, how it's influencing decision making, and this is one step in that direction. We're also testing things like analytics dashboards and transcription hours and what all that means. So this is the first tip of the iceberg, if you will.
Amazing. We're starting to get some really good questions. Are you keen to jump into Q&A?
Yeah, awesome. Let's do it. If we don't talk about feeds towards the end, I might just quickly spruik those.
We actually have a question from Matthew Carter. He's asking about, would personas be better organized into a feed or collections? I think that's probably going to depend a fair amount on sort of how your organization uses personas, but we can definitely talk about the difference between feeds and collections and what you see in each of those views.
Totally. Feeds, main sort of thing to take away is that they're dynamic, and you can essentially edit them as you would a saved search. So things like must read content, in this instance, we're doing stories and files, and the topic that it's pulling by is best of. Now, feeds are updating as things like fall into that configuration. And they typically depend on like what's important to the org. I've seen them used quite well with serving up content directly to like product managers. So each product manager obviously manages a product. So having a feed by product that is telling them quotes or like recent NPS feedback is kind of a quick way to get them engaged with some of the more continuous research that you might be doing. Now, a collection is our newest child that was introduced this week. I've got an example in a separate workspace, so I'll just pop out and show you.
While AM does that, the sort of high level title around collections is that they help you structure your repository and create boundaries, very distinct gaps between products. Personas is another example that we talked about in customer segments. So I've actually seen instances where individuals want to keep different client information in different parts of their organization. They don't necessarily want clients to be able to see different things that are happening. So that sometimes you can create a whole new workspace, but a collection allows you to actually create a container that doesn't overlap with other containers in the tool.
Exactly, yeah. And just one thing to add to that is you can think about a collection as perhaps like an approach to doing some migration from folders that are held within your own internals. And a collection can be a way for you to say, like, this is the research that resulted in this decision in 21, and this is meaningful because of X. And then you've got kind of your desk research that related to that, and you can tie it together with a short summary. So collections are really to help you create some more structure in Playback. I think something we were hearing was around how to do that. So that's one of the goals behind giving you this ability.
Fantastic. Yeah, and there's a help article about collections. Again, they rolled out this week, so any and all feedback is welcome about what's working and what's not with your collections. We have two really, really good questions in here that I think get to the heart of using Dovetail. The first is from Jay. Jay asked about not being able to understand how we get all this detailed information, all the quotes and insights and everything that we see here into Dovetail. Like, where does it all come from? Is it being imported from other tools? How does all the data get in there? Lisa had answered, yeah, it's all from markup, which is true. But maybe we can walk through, first of all, go back and watch the Dovetail 101, where we talk about actually creating these insights. But can you just flow straight from markup into Playback and sort of show us how that might look from a high level?
Yeah, sure. So high level J for this would be, okay, so getting from your raw data, starting a project, you're going to be doing that in markup, whether it's an in-depth interview, usability test, whatever it might be. Your modes for collection are going to be this import piece. You can start with a spreadsheet. That will create a object, a note each time you've got a row in the spreadsheet, which you can configure. For that continuous types of research, NPS and whatnot, Zapier is going to be a big friend to you there. If you're doing surveys, if it's not kind of approved within your organization, let us know, we can help a little bit, but that's going to be the most helpful for you in terms of not manually importing. Connecting your Zoom, you definitely want to do that if you use Zoom for interviews, because it saves you lots of clicks. Now, arguably, your kind of output within markup is either your highlights, which are these here, where I've actually highlighted some text and applied meaning to it with a tag. So in this case, it's negative experience. That creates that little highlight. And a short video, I can then add that to my insight, which in this case, which we demoed earlier in the week, is like this one: customers need a way to more easily navigate our website. Now, I'm going to publish this insight. Let's say I'm happy with it and the content. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Playback. And then if I create a story, let's do a new story, and we'll call it navigation. Yes, we need to fix, or let's say improve navigation. And then maybe I'll start building out this story from scratch, and I'm going to look for insights. And this is the one that I most recently created. I might have said, I think navigation was in the title. And then I'm going to start to create this story around why improving navigation is important. In this instance, I've just got this one insight, but what you would do is bring in, maybe navigation came up in a different project. I don't have an example, but let's just pretend that this insight in knowledge workers was also related to improving navigation, and maybe I want to have a short summary about how these are related. Jay, does this help at all with understanding how you're kind of, how the information gets into Playback?
I'll give you a second as you think about that. Yeah, thanks, Jay. That's great. And I can also wholeheartedly recommend Dovetail 101, which we'll send out as well. We go into this in a little bit more detail and talk about some of the tips and tricks alongside the functionality. We're getting lots of +1s around sort of a hybrid change management and functionality question. Lisa asked, I work for an organization that's very PowerPoint focused. Any suggestions on how to best transition this tradition to getting comfortable with the Dovetail ways of sharing findings? As we're answering this question live, I've also created a thread in our Slack community in the events channel to see if we can kind of crowdsource some information. I think that we can definitely talk about some best practices that we've seen, but this is such a good example of where knowledge from the community might be super helpful. So what do you think, AM? How would you think about transitioning folks from being used to seeing things in PowerPoint to starting to present Dovetail?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of aspects there. There's like the familiarization with Dovetail, and then like familiarization with presenting in Dovetail. I think that one of the first ways that you can start to get people familiar is actually in the like midway through your research, and by doing that in the markup product, either by doing like facilitating a session, maybe in a highlight canvas, or when you're doing like when you're actually creating insights. And let's see if this has an insight canvas, and familiarizing my like stakeholders with being a part of the research at this point. That would be my first suggestion on just familiarizing with Dovetail. So bringing them along for this journey, getting them to add comments, which they can do as viewers, so as free seats in markup. Then for presenting in Playback, one of the first things I would do is I would create a story that perhaps has some of the secondary or desk research, like decks in the actual story that they're familiar with. So it's potentially likely that you've presented on something similar previously, or you have like one way of doing things, you have a way of doing things. Then I would create a story that has those past decks and where the design is kind of in line. I would probably pitch it as well as being like a little bit more punchy, hopefully, than the deck, and visually pleasing. And you can either present it to them from here or share it with them prior to. But yeah, that's kind of my initial thinking, but happy to come back on. And that's where I've seen it sort of worked well mostly, is like getting people familiar with the raw research first. Getting them familiar first.
I also think this is an important sort of from the change management perspective, thinking about who your audience is, what your message is, what your intent is. And the power of presenting in Dovetail is how these insights are contextual. We talk a lot about traceability and trustability, being able to actually look at an insight or a conclusion that's been made, and for the audience to be able to trace that back to the raw research and then trust that the insight that or the sort of conclusion comes from real meaningful customer empathy. So I would think about what's my audience that really cares about trustability and traceability, who's my audience who's keen to actually dig into the raw research. I can imagine a world, we talk a lot about, you open every board meeting with a Dovetail homepage about what's happening with customers. I think that's a beautiful future. But as you're thinking about really bringing people on board incrementally within your organization, I would focus on an audience that really, the value prop of, I want to see this research. I actually want to dig in more. I don't want to just see the high level headline, starting there with your presentations and then sort of working out. So that you're really leaning on the things that Dovetail's best at, and that they can really see the value quickly. That'd be my 2 cents.
Nice.
Cool. Let's see. Yeah, great suggestion also from Matthew. Adding links in. So whatever you're presenting in the slide, maybe you have your highlight clip you want to go to so that people reading the PowerPoints can go click into the app. A knowledge base like Notion, yes, linking, just having people be able to click into the further research if they want to see it. Great idea, Matt. Matt, your question about Dovetail Stories is the place of suggesting solutions and saying I sometimes throw a couple ideas in at the end of the article and the content could be problem focused only. I was having this conversation about our voice of customer process as well, and sort of at what stage in the feedback process you start to solution. I think this is pretty specific to your organization, but what have you seen in terms of balancing just raw research and solutions?
Yeah, I think that what we've seen is having in the story, either at the top or the bottom, like for someone who's coming in and again thinking about your audience, like this is what we as experts now recommend as future research or recommend as actions. Actions being like, we can't really impress too much what we want someone to build, but like explaining really clearly what the customer need is there. It's not uncommon for managers in Playback to create kind of a story that's like best practice or something they would then duplicate and scrub and do again. And at the end of that is the findings and recommendations. So I definitely wouldn't shy away from it. I think it's also helpful for you to do things like comment. For example, you can comment on a comment at the top here and like start some dialogue about the recommendation that you've made. But yeah, I would totally include that as part of your framework for output. And that can be at the insight level as well. Like something might be unknown from your insight and you want to say, make a recommendation. I would definitely do that.
Awesome. Question from Amanda. Workflow patterns for doing something like a usability test. So right now they're creating a discussion guide, creating a note-taking guide in Excel, Miro, or FigJam, and then during the session they have a note taker, and they upload the video, upload the notes and link, and then have a meeting to talk about what we heard. With Dovetail, should we still be creating docs outside of Dovetail, or how should we integrate that better?
Okay, great question. This is more on the markup side, which we can definitely talk about. With the usability test, I think something that kind of goes under the radar is you might be doing the usability test, something that we'd recommend is actually keeping the notes within the notes. So you might have two of you that are, one's doing the test, one is note taking, and kind of the recommendation here is, let's say we're doing a test with Sarah. We might have the questions that we're asking or what we kind of want her to do, like the test itself, and then the notes at the bottom. So you're not kind of going back and forth between the tools, but you're actually using this as a place for taking notes either during the actual test itself. That way it's sort of kept within one place, and you've also got that structured metadata, or particularly if you're using people fields, you can match Sarah to this test. So I think that was only one half of the question though.
Yeah, I think also this is helpful for me to think through is if you're running a number of usability tests, to create usability testing as a project, and then things that are standard for the project, like your discussion guide. I'm just looking at the other things you mentioned. Yeah, the discussion guide and note-taking guide can actually be attached at the project level. So anyone can go into that sort of project README and see that static information. And then as you're having more interviews, you're going in and uploading those videos or taking notes as free text inside of the note field. So that's another way to do it too. You can still be linking out and creating documents in other places. But there are these free text blocks within Dovetail where you can put things like interview guides or note-taking guides.
Yeah, you can even like just in the act when you're doing it is like, let's say you've got your test or your discussion guide like here, you can just copy it, create a new one, and then that might be the start of your test with Sarah. Then your questions are all below, and then perhaps in that template as well, you've got how you want to encourage people to take notes. So yeah, all of that can be templatized in a usability test template.
Awesome. Ishani or Ishini, I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. There's a question regarding markup. When creating new notes, it duplicates previous notes. Wondering if that's an issue, if there's a workaround. It sounds like Ezra has the same question.
Thanks. Yeah. So this is it's not an error. This is actually because we recently made a change to the way that markup works, and essentially each of your concepts within the project, so notes, highlights, and insights, actually operate as a database. So when I add something to my notes list, it's going to appear in my notes board as well. So yes, they duplicate, but they're actually linked. The reason behind that is we wanted to give you more ways of viewing your data, and something that you will need to get comfortable with if you were using the tool prior to us making this change is understanding the importance of fields, which we also introduced around the same time. So when I open this up, we've got fields towards the top. And what you'll note is we've got like role, designer, usability test, past. Now we can actually group by, in the top right, those fields, and that's kind of the crux of it. Is the aim is to be able to quickly structure the way you want to view your data based on how you've added your metadata. So it's a newer concept and a question that we've received quite a bit this week. So we'll send out some more follow-up context about it. But yeah, it's not an error and not something you're doing.
Always good to know, right? Matthew also added, because notes are a database, you can add a filter on the view to the left and limit which notes show up for the view. So
Exactly.
that's how you can sort of ensure you're seeing the right thing. While we're on it, you'll also notice uncategorized. So those are things that for the filter view that appears in front of you does not have that value. So that's a good way of seeing what, there we are. So if we want to sort all of our usability tests into passed and failed, uncategorized are those that do not have a passed or failed value inside that note field. So that gives you the opportunity to see what of your data that you've input is not categorized in that view. So that's what you'll see, and that's the logic that populates that field. What Anne-Marie just showed is actually if you drag and drop between these columns, it will update the field. So now if you click into your interview with Andrew, you'll see it now shows his usability test score as failed. Awesome. That's so great, and thank you all for jumping in on each other's questions. We know some things about Dovetail, but getting to see things live and hearing best practices from the community is sort of one of the best parts about using the tool. So thank you all so much for that. Great, we're just going to keep rolling with questions, so feel free to drop them in, and we're going to take them here from the top. Airly asks, how do you upload Excel files so you can tag them? I ran into an issue where it asks to indicate what is taggable, but I can't find a way to denote that on the upload screen.
Okay, interested to know if you are uploading like a CSV file or if you're uploading like a spreadsheet here. So for example, using the file, see if I've got a CSV here. What's this called? Sorry. Cool. Yes. Are you thinking uploading a CSV? Often we have folks that do, if they have like quant that they also do on the side, they'll upload the file within the research to sort of like accompany it. But if you're talking about uploading the sheet itself, okay, that upload failed, please hold. If you're talking about uploading the sheet itself so you can get the survey data, then it sounds like you might need to do some reformatting on the import.
That's great. And Airly, if you're still having problems with that, go ahead and do a quick screen share or screen recording. Send it to hello@dovetailApp.com, and Emily or Jen can help you troubleshoot if you are running into something unexpected. Awesome. Allie asked a great question. Any advice on anonymizing raw data in the playback view? She wants to be transparent in sharing raw data, but also wants to protect participants' candid perspectives.
Definitely. This has come up a little bit. So on the playback side, like how can you remove things like images, if they're showing in the actual like video, for example, if you're doing highlights or clips. Unfortunately today, there's not too much that we can do from like the like obfuscation kind of side of things. It's something that we're like looking into how we would actually support that. I think what you would probably want to do most of is scrub things out, like fields that might be related to the actual, like the person data. And you also would want to limit like who can actually access playback, who can access backstage, which you might have your PII in. Other than images, voices, personal data, I think, yeah, that would be the best way to do that, to be honest.
Yeah, and Allie, if you have specific things, we're actually looking at data deletion and obfuscation right now. If you have specific things or specific workflow, if you can either email hello@, or Sarah, S-A-R-A, and let us know exactly what you want to do, we can also help you troubleshoot. That's something that we're super conscious of and is an important design principle. So I think that's great. Thank you for asking that question. Matthew asks, he's on the pro plan and would love to move up. Yay. Is there an easy way to convert duplicate tags across projects into global tags when I get there?
There is, and I love this question because I love organizing tags. But yeah, absolutely. And this can essentially happen. Let's say we've got our tag board here. You might decide that you want to move it to an extension tag, which or an extension board, which is what we call global tags. And really all you need to do is select the 3 dots, the meatball next to the tag, and you can move it up to your extension tag board. Now, for traceability, it will take everything that tag has been tagged on within the project. So here, if meetings is important for whatever reason, and I think it's more suitable for an extension tag and I want to trace that, I can send it up to my extension board. And it can then be, wherever that extension board is linked, it can then be used by my colleagues or other people doing research within the workspace as a tag for them. So yeah, you can certainly move that up. You can copy it to other tag boards, move it to other boards, but I think being able to layer it up into the extension tag gives you the ability to say, like, actually, this is important. And if you don't have permissions, it's not uncommon for like a manager to lock down permissions related to like who can edit your global tags. So if you find you can't do that, just reach out to them.
Yeah, thank you for the pricing and packaging feedback as well, Matthew. Yeah, always good to bring it up. One thing that Anne-Marie mentioned that I think is super important is that anyone can create, when you're in the markup tool, anyone can create tags within a project. So we want people to be able to go in and start analyzing research without a lot of friction. And a lot of that is creating your own bottoms up tags. However, there are organizations that really benefit from standardizing or a priori tag sets. That's defined by a certain user role. So again, any user can be, any contributor can be creating new tags. However, the extension tags that we're looking at here can actually be managed in an admin level and locked down. So as you're thinking about sort of growing your usage of Dovetail in the markup product or in Playback, knowing what anyone can do in the tool versus what is sort of admin specific is always helpful as you start to grow. So thank you for the feedback. Awesome. So we're at 4 minutes left. I think that's probably a good place to close out for today. Huge thank you to Anne-Marie. We stood up these 101 and 102 sessions as a bit of an experiment, just to help reach out to people who are having questions and give us another opportunity to meet some new people working on Dovetail. So really happy that Anne-Marie was able to put these together. And they are, like everything we do, a work in progress. If there's something that you wish that we had covered that you want to go deep on, please let us know. We're always happy to hop on, film something and send it out. We really appreciate all of the feedback and hope that you learned something today that's going to help you use Dovetail and get to know your customers better.